Hey there guys, so today's video is going to be my favorite winter eyeshadow palettes for the end of 2022 and going into 2023. Let me just see if there's something on my camera. Yeah, that was like a little streak. So we're going to go through all the eyeshadow palettes that I would say are my favorite winter eyeshadow palettes, but also palettes that I would like to prioritize to use during the winter season. I feel like that this has been the best way for me to use the eyeshadow palettes that I want to use throughout the season, and it's a way for me to still reach for these palettes without feeling like overwhelmed. Like if I goal myself to use about 15 to 20 eyeshadow palettes per season, like December through March through the end of June, like for spring, it becomes a little bit easier for me to prioritize certain eyeshadow palettes to use. So since Christmas is almost here, I also wanted to include some Christmas palettes for you guys, because what perfect time to do this, to include Christmas palettes, obviously, then right before Christmas time. I'm going to be going through my ColourPop palettes first, obviously, because I have the most ColourPop palettes that I want to talk about. Obviously, ColourPop is my most purchased eyeshadow palette brand. I have about 30 palettes from them, so I would like to talk about a few palettes that I would like to use this season. So the first one I'm actually going to talk about is the one I'm wearing on my eyes today. And I actually have not used this palette since last Christmas, and I was so obsessed with using this one during Christmas last year. I thought that they smashed it with this Christmas release last year, and that is the Christmas ColourPop Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer eyeshadow palette. I used this palette so much last year during Christmas time. Like, I just loved it. And I think that the reason why I love this palette so much is because it's a muted Christmas dream to me. Like, there's warm neutrals in here, but there's also some cooler tone neutrals. There's a red, there's a green, there's a lot of depth in this last row. I really feel like with this color story, they didn't just put a bunch of nude shades on the top. Like, of course, you have your neutral shades, but I like that what they did is that they didn't make the neutral shades on the top too dark, but they also didn't make them too light. They're mid-tone, but they have like a certain lightness to them. So even people that are a little bit darker, obviously than me, because I'm pale as snow, these are really, really like, they're mid-tone, but they have like a neutrally, like, not paleness to them, but like a lightness to them. But also the shimmers in this palette are absolutely stunning. They're super buttery, very metallic, very super smooth and shiny on the lid. I think this is one of their best palettes they've ever done. And this is one of my favorite collab palettes that they've also ever done. I think I did my favorite collab palettes, or maybe just my favorite Disney palettes from ColourPop. But, you know, since I have a lot of ColourPop palettes, I have to rotate what I can. And I just really wanted to use ColourPop again today. And I was like, why don't I just use the Rudolph palette, because I haven't used this since last December. And I really just want to refresh my memory on whether or not I still love this palette. And I really do. It performed so easily. And that's the reason why I love ColourPop's formula, is that it's just such an easy formula to work with. It's such a good beginner-friendly formula. And I just think that these metallics in here are insanely beautiful and shiny. And I just feel like this is a muted Christmas dream for somebody that wants to have a neutral palette for Christmas, but you can also amp it up and put like the green on the lower lash line if you're a little bit afraid of color. I think that the red and the green are like colors that still are neutral leaning, but also add such a pop of interest to your look. Like, they're just so pretty. And these mattes are so pigmented. Like, look at that. Isn't that so pretty? And then I'll swatch like a couple of shimmers. I'm not going to swatch everything in this video. I just wanted to show you guys how pretty these ones are. They swatch so good too. Like, again, this is one of their best palettes they've ever done, in my opinion. So this one is Christmassy Time, this one is Full Power, and this one is Handsome Nose. And I was hoping that they were going to do like another like really big Christmas collection this year because I thought that this release was just so good, and I bought almost everything from this release. I got the highlighter, I got the 2 lippy kits, I got the bath bomb, and I got the eyeshadow palette. And the eyeshadow palette sold out, and most of the collection sold out. Like, a lot of people really loved this collection, and for good reason, because this formula is amazing. So what I'm wearing on my eyes today is that I just did a very simple neutral look. I used the shade Eat in my crease, then I darkened up the crease more with Little Buck, and then I used Ready Santa on the outer corners. And then I took the shade Snowbank all over my lid, and then I just popped North Pole on my inner corners, and that's all I'm wearing today because I really wasn't doing much today. I was supposed to see my boyfriend, but then I just got my nails done. I got like green Christmas nails, so it kind of matches this color. But yeah, I think I'm going to be reaching for this quite a bit as well during this Christmas season as well. So I just wanted to really talk about this palette first because I'm definitely going to be using this a lot. So love that palette. Now let's just get into some other palettes that I'm going to be reaching for, or ones that I would like to use during this winter season. I've already been using this one a lot, and this has probably been my go-to neutral palette lately. I love this palette. I almost used this one today, but I was like, no, I really want to use some of my Christmas palettes this week and next week because I'll be able to use this one after Christmas is over. And this one is the Not a Box of Chocolates palette, and I have been loving this palette, you guys. This is one of my favorite palettes that I've tried from ColourPop this year as well. It's just so good. Originally, I was going to skip over this palette. I know what I say when I say that, every single time that I say that, and then I end up picking up the palette, it ends up becoming one of my favorite palettes. This palette is so good, you guys, and the reason why I want to recommend this one too, besides the Rudolph, I don't think you can get anymore. I think they discontinued that a while ago, but this one obviously is still available. They just released this like I think a month or two ago. And the reason why this one is so good and so versatile is because it really has some deep chocolatey brown mattes that can suit a variety of skin tones. And I know people are always like, ColourPop releases so many neutral palettes. They're called ColourPop. Why isn't there more color? But a lot of people responded to this collection, and quite a few of the items are sold out. Not the eyeshadow palette yet, though. So I highly recommend this palette because I think it's such an easy palette to work with. It's such a good neutral everyday palette. The only con for me is that I do wish there was a little bit of a lighter shade in here besides this. But I don't want to think that way when it comes to a neutral palette sometimes because it's not just going to be suited for my needs only. I'm glad that they did this to suit a lot of different skin tones, and I'm glad that they're listening to their customers, and making something more suitable for more people to use. And I feel like that's why a lot of people responded to this collection. So the metallics in here are stunning. The mattes perform so well, so easy to blend. I just will say that some of the mattes do tend to look a little bit similar on the eyes, but at the same time, like, I appreciate how many mattes are in here because you can actually really change it up. And there's 8 true mattes in here and then one with glitter. So you have plenty of matte options in this palette. And the shimmers are stunning. I just want to swatch my 2 favorites, which is Peanut Brittle and Hazelnut Crunch. They are so gorgeous. They're so metallic and beautiful on the lid. And those are those 2 shades. So this one is Peanut Brittle and this one is Hazelnut Crunch. Both absolutely gorgeous. And I really have been enjoying every time I use this palette. It really is beautiful. I almost used it again today, but I wanted to use my Christmas palettes. But this one's gorgeous, and I think I'm going to be using this even more in the winter time because I really love like these chocolatey deep tones for this time of year, or like cooler tone neutrals. There's some I really love neutral palettes that have a mix of neutral warm tones and cool tones, and I feel like this one is pretty much the perfect fit for that if that's what you're looking for. So I am rambling way too much already. Okay, so then the next 2 palettes I'm just going to talk about together. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to these palettes this winter because honestly I don't really use these palettes anymore. They're mostly just collector's items at this point, but that doesn't go to say that I haven't used these a ton, and I always use these around the winter season. I think I even was able to use them a little bit last season, and those are the ColourPop Frozen 2 palettes. This one is the Anna palette, and this one is the Elsa palette. The Anna palette is one of my all-time favorite 9 pans from ColourPop. I think that they really, really nailed the color story in this one. I think this one is kind of a purpley neutral dream. I think that the mattes in here are just so good, and the matte selection in here really gives you a lot of depth and dimension, and I feel like every single matte in here goes with the shimmers so well. Like these two goldeny tones with this beautiful yellow gold, this purple with this purple shade, and this berry tone. They're just so pretty. So I'm not going to talk about these too much because I feel like these are like what, from like 2018, 2019. So they're kind of an older release, but I just wanted to mention them because I am going to try and use them. I'm not sure if I'm going to be successful, but I feel like I did use this like January or February. I might have used this once, or maybe even last December, but this palette is beautiful, and I've always ranked this palette very high in my ColourPop rankings because this is one of my favorite 9 pans. I love it so much. I'm not sure if I've ranked all of my 9 pans. I can't even remember. I know I've done multiple ColourPop rankings on my channel, but if I haven't done that, that will definitely be coming at some point. But I love this palette. It's really, really good. I don't even know if this one's available anymore, though. I keep on seeing that random pieces of the Frozen collection are available, but I don't know if the palettes are. But you guys can check and search on the ColourPop website because I'm really not sure. And then the other one, of course, is the Elsa palette. This color story, not everybody really loved, but honestly, the more and more I used this one, the more and more I thought it was a really beautiful color story, but at the same time, there are less mattes in this one than there is in the Anna one. I kind of wish they would have put one more matte in here, but at the same time, I kind of get why they only did 4 mattes because, you know, Elsa's like a frosty queen, and she's the snow queen, and I think that they put some gorgeous metallic shimmers in here. I love the blue. I love these red toned deepening shades. Maybe they could have changed one of these colors because these ones are the only two that kind of look very similar on the eyes. I probably would have kept this one because this is a gorgeous red, and probably would have replaced this with maybe like a matte purple or like a deeper tone blue. I thought that would have been really fun. It is a beautiful palette, though. I don't think that this blue is that great, though. That's probably the only shade that's like kind of a dud in here. In the Anna palette, there are absolutely no duds. They're all beautiful shades. But this blue is not very pigmented, but the rest of the shades are gorgeous. So I'm going to try and use this one as well. I don't know if I'm going to be successful, though. And then the last ColourPop 9 pan in this video is another Disney one, but I kind of want to prioritize using this palette over the Frozen palettes because I used this palette so much when I bought it. I used it so much. It was like one of my go-tos, and now I just don't really reach for it pretty much at all anymore. And whenever I want to do a green look, I always reach for either Odin's Eye or like some other brand. I don't usually normally reach for this one, and this is the Star Wars, The Mandalorian, The Child palette. Sorry, give me a second, guys. Sorry, I just needed to see what my mom was doing. So this is the Child palette. I'm not sure, again, if I'm going to be able to get to this palette, but I'm going to try my hardest to because I want to use my collection, and I actually really love this palette, and I don't want to declutter this palette because I actually really think that this is a really good palette. I think that this is one of their best curated Star Wars palettes, and this is really the only one that I was interested in besides the Star Wars palette, like for the original movies. I thought that they curated this one beautifully, and also, who doesn't love Baby Yoda? Hello. But this one is gorgeous. Like the metallics in here are stunning, and I think this one's still available on the website, but the metallics are gorgeous in this one. So yeah, and like I really love like the murky swampy greens in here, and I think they really did again a great job with the matte selection in this and the shimmer selection, I never feel like I need to reach for anything else to build depth in this palette because they have this dark brown, so that works with everything. And then this dark green, and then these two matte greens. Like, I honestly have done so many different looks with this palette, I never get bored with it. I think it's always beautiful, and then the shimmers are just so gorgeous on the lid. So I love this palette, and I raved about this one for a while, so hopefully I can get into it at some point. I'm not sure if it came out in 2020 or 2021. I can't remember, but I know when it came out, I used this so much when I thought I wasn't going to use it as much as I did, and I used this a ton. So, yeah. Okay, 2 more ColourPop palettes. The next one is the only 12 pan in this video, and that is the, of course I have to include this for winter, duh, the Nightmare Before Christmas palette. And I actually did use this during Halloween time because this is probably the only palette that's going to be from fall to winter, because obviously you could use it during Halloween time and during Christmas time. I'm not sure, again, if I'm going to get to this, though, this winter, because, but there are a few palettes that I have used that I talked about. I've used the Rudolph palette, I've used the Not a Box of Chocolates palette, and I've used the next palette that I'm going to be talking about. So I've already been using, like, my winter palettes that I want to use, so that's pretty good, too. I will see if I get to this palette or not, but it's not really a huge priority for me because I've already used it in October, and I actually did use this, I think in the spring or summertime, and I did like a pink look with it. So it's not like I haven't used this palette this year, so it's not a huge deal if I don't get to it. I just wanted to mention it because this is a really good palette. I think that the quality of this palette is so good. I know that not a lot of people really were in love with the color story, but I really, really appreciated this color story. Like, once you have it and you start using it, the quality of this one is so good, you guys. The mattes in here are great, and the shimmers are so pretty. Maybe I would have changed up a couple of the shimmer shades. Like, I think that this pink and this orange and this white are gorgeous. I'm not, like, too thrilled about these two. They're pretty, but honestly, the stars of these palette are these, like, this orange shimmer. Pumpkin Patch is amazing, and the neon orange is fantastic. So neon on the eyes. This might actually be my favorite shade in the palette, and usually I'm like a shimmer girl, but this matte is so insanely neon. It's so pretty. But I really think that they did a great job with this color story. Again, they didn't put a full row of light neutrals on the top, and I think that's what a lot of people appreciated that. And I think this collection did sell out ultimately, or the eyeshadow palette did end up selling out, so it still did very well. But this palette's really pretty. I'm going to try and get to it. Maybe I'll do like a smoky tone gray look, but I have decluttered a lot of eyeshadow palettes from my collection, but at the same time, there are some other eyeshadow palettes I would like to prioritize, but I just want to mention either my favorite palettes or the ones that I really want, but I will use most of these this winter season, and these are the palettes that I'm going to concentrate on using. So that one is that one, and then the last ColourPop palette, spoiler alert, this is my favorite palette I tried from ColourPop this year. So that's a big spoiler alert, and that is the Harry Potter Back to Hogwarts palette. I've actually used this a couple of times already. I just used this yesterday, and I was obsessed with the look that I did. I don't know if you guys saw my Instagram stories, but I usually post all of my looks on my Instagram stories. If you guys follow me there at CBW819, I freaking adore this palette, you guys. And I know that this palette was so soaked in controversy, but why did they have to make this palette so freaking good? It is so amazing, you guys. The only thing that I would change is that, did we really need these shades of brown in here? I mean, granted, they only put 3 shades of brown, and honestly, I do kind of appreciate that, because if I'm reaching for this palette, I'm mostly going to be using this side of the palette, because you guys know I love my warm tones. And like I said, if you look at this palette divided by 2 15-pan palettes, you could really see them as standalone color stories. Like, this could be a gorgeous blue and green cool tone palette, and then this could be a gorgeous warm tone palette. So that's how I kind of look at it, and then I'm like, I feel like they were necessary, but at the same time, I'm like, did we really need another shade of brown? But at the same time, I do reach for those colors a ton when I do use this palette. So I just used this palette yesterday though, and now I can finally say that I've used all the shades, because not that I haven't used all the shades, but the only shade that I didn't use on its own technically was Forbidden Forest, because it is a pressed glitter. I used it for Comic-Con and I tapped it over another shade, but I never actually used it on its own. You guys, I was obsessed with how it looked on my lid yesterday. It was one of the best glitters I've ever used from them. It is so multi-dimensional on the lid. It has like these gorgeous green, red, and blue sparkles running through it, and it barely transferred. Like, these shimmers barely transfer. And the reason why I love this palette so much, I mean, I did such a gorgeous look yesterday. I did the Elder one in the crease, and I darkened up the crease more with Sorting Hat, and then I really deepened it up with Dementor. No, not Sorting Hat. I used Ravenclaw, which is my favorite matte in the palette. This blue is phenomenal. And then I used the black, which is also an amazing shade. And then I put Forbidden Forest all over the lid, and I was obsessed with my look yesterday. And then I just put floating candles on the inner corners, and then I put Patronus on the lower lash line. It was such a gorgeous look. I did not want to take my makeup off yesterday because I loved the look yesterday. Like, there's just something about this palette that is so good. They're so easy to blend, pigmented mattes, and the shimmers are so stunning on the lid. I know that there's not like too many special shimmers in here, but once they're on the eyes, they look so stunning. And I also freaking love these two shimmers, Lumos and Floating Candles. They are so metallic, but also like they make your inner corner pop so much, and they make them like just brighten your look so much. I love this palette. I'm just gonna swatch Ravenclaw, and let's swatch Lumos. Love this shade. And Patronus is my favorite shimmer though. That one is so stunning on the lid. Oh my god, you guys. I almost used just Patronus yesterday because I was like, I don't know how the pressed glitter is going to be. And Patronus always swatches like crap, but it's so gorgeous on the eyes. Like, if you build it up on the eyes, it's so stunning. And then this one is Ravenclaw, and this one is Lumos, which is such a gorgeous metallic. I actually just used that on my lid the last time I used this palette before yesterday. I love it, and I'm going to continue to use it through this winter season. So I've already used it a couple of times. It's not even winter yet, and this is one of my most used palettes this year since I got it. I love it. I adore this palette. It's so freaking good. And it sucks that it was so wrapped in controversy, because I know they wanted to do the collection justice, and that's the unfortunate thing. I just put this on backwards, but that's the unfortunate thing about this collection, is that I feel like they really wanted to make this collection good so fans would be excited and happy for it. But it just sucks that the author is a crackpot. I'm sorry, she's a freaking crackpot. But I still wanted to get the palette. Okay, now let's talk about some other brands. I put everything over here. So let's talk about some palettes that I would like to either prioritize. I'm definitely going to use these palettes next week. So the brand that I really want to use, I really don't use their palettes anymore. Like, I don't know. I just really don't use them that much anymore. And that is the Glamlite Christmas palettes from last year. You guys, I really have not touched these palettes since like January, but at the same time, these are Christmas palettes, so I don't really use my Christmas palettes all that often until Christmas time, like December. I'm not going to reach for these on a daily basis because, again, they're Christmas-themed palettes. So the first one is the Pie palette. And before this came out, and when they were teasing this, I was so freaking excited for this palette because I love cherry pie. I love making pie. I was just so excited to get a pie palette because I love pie. But when I saw the color story, a lot of people were kind of underwhelmed with it because a lot of people were like, how come you made a cherry themed outside, but then you didn't give us any reds on the inside? But I think that this is a pretty, so this is the Pie palette, and I'm not saying that this palette isn't stunning because the Glamlite shimmers are so beautiful and their mattes are so easy to work with. I've kind of heard like mixed reviews lately on their formula. I still really like their formula. And I really want to use the Chocolate Donut palette that I'm going to get to in just a minute. But this palette, I'm always like less likely to reach for just because there's not that many mattes in this palette. Not to say that I haven't made gorgeous looks with this palette because I think that they're all beautiful shades. It's just doesn't inspire me to reach for it. It's not like I'm ever going to get rid of it though, because Glamlite palettes are so much fun to display. And honestly, getting the Christmas box and getting these palettes, they weren't really that expensive, but getting the Christmas box, I think it was only like $45. So it was such a good value. And I love mostly everything that I got in that Christmas box, including this. That's why I bought it. And I really love the blush in here. Honestly, if I haven't reached for the eyeshadows, I was reaching for this blush a lot, and it's such a good blush. But I really like their formula, and I'm going to try and use this as much as I can, or I'm going to try and use it at least once. I don't know if I'm going to use it more than once, though, to be honest. I'm just going to swatch these 3 shades. I just think that the metallics are just so good, you guys. I'm just going to show you with my hand because my hand is full of swatches already. So this one is sweet potato, this one is apple pie, and this one is pecan. Pecan. I say pecan. Most people say pecan, but I don't like saying pecan. It's pecan. Sorry, not sorry. But it's beautiful. I'm going to try and use it. I'm definitely going to use it next week, so. But I don't know. There's just like a thing about Glamlite that just doesn't make me want to reach for their palettes that much. Like, I'd rather wear like ColourPop or Natasha Denona or even Odin's Eye over Glamlite sometimes. Like, I haven't even reached for the Red Velvet Cupcake palette that much, and I kind of want to use that one more too. But these two I'm going to prioritize. And then the other one, like I said, is the Chocolate Donut palette. I almost used this palette today, but then I was like, I really should use the Rudolph palette because it was like my favorite palette last year from ColourPop, or one of my favorite palettes. But this one is just such a pretty palette as well. I like this one more than the Pie palette because I honestly really wanted to wait for Glamlite to release a neutral palette because everybody was telling me to try the brand and everybody's like, it's so good. Why haven't you tried it? I'm just like, there's not really a color story that I've been interested in, but they are very high on my list to try. And I honestly feel like I should have just waited to get this palette. I think I did use it like a little bit last year, but I think I got these palettes when my mom was sick with COVID back in 2020. For some reason, I thought I got them last year, but I used them a lot then because I bought so many palettes that year, and it's not like I haven't decluttered some of those palettes, but I bought a lot of palettes in 2020 and 2021, so that's why I was trying to buy less palettes this year. Like, honestly, the only palette that I bought this year that I've talked about so far is the Harry Potter palette, and then one of the next palettes that I'm going to be talking about from another brand. But I really tried not to add too many palettes to my collection this year. I mean, I still tried over 20 palettes, but that last year and the year before, I think I tried almost 30 something eyeshadow palettes, and I was like, that's just too many. So anyway, this palette is beautiful. I'm definitely going to be using this one soon. I think that the matte selection here is beautiful and the shimmers are gorgeous. I like this palette more because it is more of a neutral color story, and it's definitely a palette that I'm going to be more likely to reach for over the Pie palette. And the highlighter in here is so freaking stunning. And the mattes are just so buttery smooth and beautiful, and the shimmers are just so sparkly and pretty. Look at that. They're just so good. So this one is Sweet Filling, this one is Chocolicious, and this one is Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth is a really, really gorgeous metallic as well. So I'm really excited to jump back into this one. I mean, I could use this one anytime, but for some reason, I just am more inspired to use all my other neutral palettes in my collection over this one, but I really would like to use it again, and I'm very excited to use it for the holiday season. These both came out like back to back in like 2020. And this was the only thing that I got from the chocolate collection. I wasn't really interested in anything else, but I was like, I am 100% getting the neutral eyeshadow palette. And this is beautiful. I love it. Okay, so those are the two palettes from Glamlite. Now let's move on to Oden's Eye. And I've used both of these palettes already during this holiday season. I've been using this palette ever since I got it. I actually started using this in November. So at first I was like, I'm not going to prioritize it in November. But then I ended up using it so much because I wanted to try out every single shade before December hit, because I just fell in love with it. And I'm obviously talking about the Oden's Eye Merry Christmas palette. This was the one that I got out of the two palettes, and I kind of was getting a little bit of FOMO missing out on the Christmas Eve palette, but at the same time, I'm like, Caitlin, you gotta be practical. You were only gonna reach for that palette during Christmas time. I mean, obviously, I'm gonna do the same with this one, but I wanted to get the palette that I knew that I was gonna use more, and I knew I was gonna use this palette more, so I picked the one that appealed to me the most. I mean, a lot of people are ranking this palette very high or just talking very highly about this Christmas release in general, because Oden's Eye literally smashed this release. They literally came out with some of the most stunning palettes I've ever seen before. This palette is absolutely gorgeous. And I finally got the opportunity to try out every single shimmer, and they're all literally so phenomenal on the lid because they have such multi-dimensional shifts to them. And that's the reason why I got this palette over the Christmas Eve one, is because I thought that these shimmers were way more unique and more shifty than the ones in the Christmas Eve palette. Not to say that that palette wasn't gorgeous. And the mattes are also stunning. The only thing I would say is that I kind of wish that there was a couple of different mattes in here, but at the same time, like, I'm talking about like literally like I kind of wanted like a berry shade to go with this blush shade, and then maybe like a deeper toned chocolatey brown shade over the black, because y'all know I don't really need a black. I'd rather just have a deep chocolatey brown over any deepening shade any day, because you guys know I always use matte browns to deepen up everything. But this palette is truly stunning, truly a magical shift on your lid. They're just gorgeous, and I actually just used this palette on Saturday. Oh my god, this thing is driving me crazy. And I got to dip into the Elf Wish shade, which is the multi-chrome in this palette, and it's absolutely gorgeous on the lid, and that's probably my favorite multi-chrome I've ever tried from Oden's Eye. It's absolutely phenomenally beautiful. And then all these other shimmers just have such an amazing shift to them. They're definitely my favorite shimmers I've ever tried from Oden's Eye, hands down. They're just amazing. And that's what truly makes these palettes so special, is the shimmers. Like, they really are amazingly gorgeous. So this one is New Year. This one is the multi-chrome Elf Wish, and this one is Little Star, which is also a stunning shade. Oh, yes, so pretty. And they swatch so beautifully. So this one is New Year. This one is Elf Wish. I'll try and shift it a little bit. It's not really shifting on camera, but you can definitely see the shift in person. And then this one is Little Star, which is kind of like a pinky gold. It's such a unique shade. And the mattes are just as beautiful. They're so rich and gorgeous, and they're just like amazing. Like, I don't know how their formula is so good. Do you see how rich and beautiful those are? Very similar to like the Rudolph palette mattes. The ColourPop ones honestly are really good quality. So if you want to get something a little bit more accessible, the ColourPop's a really good option too. So this one is Christmas Tree, this one is Poisonetta, and this one is, what is that one called? Can't even read it. Hot Cocoa. I couldn't see it without the light hitting it. So yeah, those are that is the Oden's Eye palette, and I love it. I continue to use this, and I will continue to use this. Hopefully I'll be able to use it a few times next week, because this is really the only palette I'm going to be using at work, because I really just want to wear the crap out of this before Christmas. So, probably going to use this on Sunday. So yeah, love this palette. Really, really pretty. And then the other Oden's Eye palette I wanted to talk about is the Annette's Makeup Corner and Oden's Eye, the Giant Wolves palette. I actually already used this palette, like, I think only a couple days ago. Yeah, I did. So I don't have to really prioritize this palette too much because I've already used it. But of course, this is such a stunning winter color story. And what's crazy is that I used this palette so much more when I actually did get this collection of palettes. I was reaching for this palette a lot. Because this palette is so freaking stunning, you guys. And I'm sorry that this palette and the Merry Christmas palette from Oden's Eye are no longer available. But honestly, like, Oden's Eye does warn people a lot that when their palettes and their collections are limited edition, they are limited edition. Like, they are not coming back in stock. They've never restocked the legendary Diversa palettes, and they're not going to be able to restock the Christmas palettes. And a lot of people are really upset about the Christmas palettes, but they did warn people. But I honestly think that they did release these palettes a little bit too early. Let me just go wash my hand off. My hand is full of glitter. Give me a second. Sorry, my hand was way too full of glitter. So this is the Giant Wolves palette. Now, these are gorgeous shimmers and beautiful mattes. I think that the matte selection that she chose for this palette is so smart, because all of these mattes do work beautifully with these shimmers. Like, Annette is such a color genius, to be honest. Like, the color combos that she puts together are some of the most beautiful combos that I've ever seen, and so is Angelica Nyquist. I absolutely love Angelica's looks together as well. They're both the color queens, to be honest. I think that they curated beautiful palettes for Oden's Eye. But I have a sweet spot for this one because Annette really thinks about, like, what mattes are going to go with what shimmer. And the way that she created this is so gorgeous. Like, this pink and blue goes so gorgeous with this multi-chrome. But then you have these two gorgeous purple shades that go with any one of these shades. Like the purple, this purple, and then the multi-chrome as well. And then you have a mustardy, murky, like yellowish brown. And then you have this green that goes really good with the gold and the astral shade. I've created such beautiful looks with this palette, and every time I wear this palette, I love my eyeshadow. But also, like, this palette, I can really appreciate that there is a black in here, because then you can add so much depth and dimension to this beautiful eyeshadow palette. And I really just think that she created this in such a amazing color genius kind of way, and she really knocked it out of the park with this. It's amazing, and I love this palette so much. So these shimmers are phenomenal. This is like one of my favorite palettes I've ever had in my collection, and the mattes are gorgeous as well. So this one is Flare, this one is Astral, and this one is Azure. Again, I'm not going to swatch every single palette in this video, but I feel like that's what's happening. But I have to swatch Oden's Eye shimmers. Are you kidding me? So this one is Flare, this one is Astral, and this one is Azure. I also really want to use the Red Dragon palette, but I kind of think of that palette as being like a really beautiful, like, spring palette, and I think I did include that in my spring, or include that. I said include that in my spring and summer palette, whatever, favorites or whatever. But yeah, this palette is gorgeous. Again, I'm sorry that you can't get it anymore, but at least I've already used it once, so if I don't use it again, it's not like a huge deal. But I love this palette. I almost used it again a couple of days ago. Okay, now let's get into some onesie brands. I'm going to put the rest over here so I don't have to keep on going over here And then we'll talk about these. So this palette is definitely one of my favorites to use during the winter time. I also used this palette a ton when I first got it back in February. So this, I can't believe that this is the first year that I tried Nomad Cosmetics, but honestly, this is still my favorite palette that I tried from them, and I cannot believe how much use I've actually gotten out of this one. When I thought I wasn't going to use this palette as much as I have, and this is the Whistler Snow Lodge palette. I think they really did something beautiful with this palette. And for some reason, this was the palette that got me to try the brand. I was just so intrigued by this color story. And every time I open this palette, I'm like, wow, this palette is literally stunning. I love the selection that they used in this palette, and sometimes I do reach for other mattes, but then when I do use this palette, I'm like, I have all the mattes that I need. Honestly, the only time that I reach for a different matte is if I'm doing like a more neutral look with this palette, like if I use the gold, or if I use Ski In, or if I use this shade. But the shimmers in here are so freaking beautiful, and the mattes are so good. My favorite matte is this royal blue. Oh my god. This one is so stunning, you guys, and I actually have already used this palette as well. So I'm using a lot of my palettes. I've used about 7 or 8 of them already. So I'm feeling pretty good, and it's not even winter time yet. But again, I used this palette a ton when I first got it back in like February. So again, if I didn't get to this palette, it wasn't a huge deal, but I still really wanted to use it this winter season because it's so stunning. And the shimmers in here are so phenomenal, and the mattes are so richly pigmented. But this blue, oh my god, some of the shimmers in here are some of my favorites from Nomad. This blue, look at that blue shade. Are you joking? My favorite shimmer is Whistler, which is the signature shade, but it's such a gorgeous minty green. Love it. And then this shade, Up to Snow Good. Are you joking? Such a gorgeous berry tone. But these are gorgeous. Like, you cannot tell me these aren't stunning. So this one is Black Comb. This one is Whistler. And this one is Up to Snow Good. They're such cute little punny names. And the mattes are insanely good. Like, this matte blue is phenomenal. And this red is amazing. They're just so good, you guys. So this one is the blue and this one is the red. So that one is For Fox's Sake, and this one is Snowmad. So beautiful palette, and I'm kind of wanting to dip into this palette again. I kind of want to use the berry tones again, like these shades. So I will obviously keep you guys updated whether or not I use all of these palettes, but I have been making a good dent. And before I talk about the rest of my palettes in this video, I just wanted to say that I actually use every single palette that I talked about in my fall favorites video, like my fall favorite eyeshadow palettes. I used every single palette. And I just finished using every single palette before the fall was over, like last week. So I'm really proud of myself for that. But I love this palette too. Okay, and then this palette, it's definitely going to be one of my go-to neutral palettes, and it's already been, but the hype for this palette, the hype for this brand is real, you guys, and that is the Blend Bunny Cosmetics All Done Up palette. This is definitely a holiday neutral palette, but it's also a palette that you can use all round, and I think that's why this palette is such a favorite for people, is that it doesn't only work for Christmas time, it works for pretty much any time of the year. But when I look at this palette, I really think of it as a cool tone neutral palette for the winter time. And I actually just finished testing out this palette a couple of days ago. The mattes are so good, you guys. They just blend amazingly. Is it my all-time favorite matte formula? I don't really know. I don't think it's anything like mind-blowing to me that I haven't tried. But the reason why these mattes are so good is because they blend amazingly, they last a long time, and they're pigmented, but they're not hard to blend. And I think that's why so many people love Blend Bunny's mattes. And then these shimmers are insanely gorgeous on the lid. Some of the best shimmers I've used all year, to be honest. They are so incredibly metallic and blinding. I'm just going to swatch a couple of them. This one is Centerfold and this one is Shine. Oh, Lordy. These really do shine on your lid. They are so gorgeous. So this one is Centerfold and this one is Shine. They are so blinding, you guys. Almost more blinding than the Oden's Eye shimmers. And that is saying a lot. But they are a little bit more transfer prone because they are so metallic. Not as transfer prone as Adept though. And these mattes are 10 million times better than the Adept mattes for me, like 100%. They're so buttery smooth and easy to use. The Adept mattes, just, I could not get them to work at all for me. So this one is Muse, and this one is Doe-Eyed. Or maybe that's Ready. I have no idea. They're not really going to swatch that great right now, but yeah. They actually swatch pretty good. So that one is Muse and this one is Doe-Eyed. So very beautiful palette. I'm definitely going to use it more. I almost wanted to use it today, but again, since I really wasn't doing much, I'm actually going to dip into this palette tomorrow for work because I did a gray tone look with it and I was obsessed with it. So I'm just going to do that look again tomorrow. So yeah. Definitely have been using this palette quite a bit, and I'm going to continue using it throughout the winter season. So this palette is really good as well. I didn't think that this video was going to take me this long to get through, but I had like 18 eyeshadow palettes because I picked out a lot for some reason. And then this palette I would like to use even more. This is the only palette that I haven't used every single shimmer on my lid, but I've used the majority of them. There's only one that I haven't used. And that is the Game Beauty Victory palette. I would like to use this palette more because honestly, I was so impressed with the formula of this one. It's a really good palette, you guys. And again, this is a very easy palette to use. The mattes are so easy to blend, so buttery smooth and so good. Like honestly, I would compare them to Sigma or Blend Bunny. I think that they're very similar matte formulas. These just blend like a dream. They're so easy to use. And then the shimmers are gorgeous. The only thing is that I feel like I'm not going to reach for this palette enough because I don't know if it's like a palette that I'm going to be like dying to do a look that I loved the last time that I did it. Just because it doesn't offer that many differentiation with the shades, but at the same time when I do wear this palette, I love my eyeshadow. So maybe I'm definitely going to use it more, and I definitely have to use the shade Loot on my lid. But this was the only palette that I really was drawn to from the brand because all the other palettes are kind of super colorful for me, and I knew I wouldn't really get that much use out of those, and I felt like this was the only color story that really did appeal to me the most. But some of the mattes are a bit similar. I do love the pops of blue in here though. It kind of gives me very Naked Wild West vibes. I think it's a very similar color story and the formula is 10 million times better. So hopefully I will get some more use out of it because I really don't want to say goodbye to this palette at some point because I think that the formula is so freaking good. And I'm not going to swatch anything further after this because I've just been swatching too many palettes. I'm holding it upside down. But this is a good palette and a really good formula. Okay, let's talk about another holiday palette. And I have been having such mixed feelings about this brand and about this palette. But I do want to use it at least once during this holiday season. And that is the Grown on Girls Cosmetics That Time of Year palette. I've kind of stopped purchasing from this brand. I haven't purchased from this brand since February. I'm also really not that thrilled with the formula of this brand. I don't think it's really as good as people were hyping it up to be. I'm not saying anything against the people that created this palette, but I don't think the formula is really as good as the other palettes that I've been talking about, like Oden's Eye and ColourPop and Blend Bunny. Like Blend Bunny, I would pick over any day with this palette. So this is the Gourmand Girls That Time of Year palette. And this is the only palette that my voice cracked a little bit, that I don't want to declutter because I absolutely love and adore the creators that did this palette, and that is Debutante, Riri, and Xenia. And I think that they created a gorgeous color story, and I have such a sentimental attachment to this palette because this is how I made friends on YouTube, through connecting with these beautiful women. And I think that they created a gorgeous color story. For me, though, the only reason why I don't reach for this palette really enough at all, I haven't used this palette since it came out. So I really have not reached for this palette pretty much at all. I do think that the shimmers are gorgeous. I just wish that there was a little bit more depth with the matte shades in here. Not saying that the matte shades aren't really good in this palette, but some of the shimmers are a little hard pressed because when I use them as a glitter glue, they're a little bit harder to adhere to the lid. So maybe I should use them without a glitter glue. I'm going to try and use this palette for Christmas time because honestly, if it just sits in my drawer, it's kind of a waste. But I really don't want to get rid of this palette, so, because I think it's beautiful, and I really won't ever get rid of it, but I just have such, like, a personal bad experience that I really just don't know if I'm going to be continuing to, I mean, I'm not supporting the brand anymore, but if you did want to buy a good palette and you wanted to support the creators that did this palette, get this palette. Like, I'm not gonna discourage you from buying from this brand. That's just my own personal choice. So this one is Icicle, this one is Silver Bells, and this one is Nostalgia. I know I said I wasn't going to swatch anymore, but I kind of wanted to swatch them for myself, and they're still really beautiful. So I'm going to try and use these. I think the shimmers are definitely the star of this palette. The mattes are good, but the shimmers are amazing in this palette. So I really do want to try and use it at least once because I got to do it for my girls. So that is the That Time of Year palette. And then we just have 3 more palettes to talk about. I'm going to try... Oh, yeah, I use this palette, too. So the first one, I'm going to try and prioritize one of these other ones because these palettes I use a lot. So this, I'm just going to mention 2 palettes from Natasha Denona. So this is the Natasha Denona Retro palette. I actually have used this palette a couple of times this past November. This was actually the palette that I had the makeup artist for Becca's wedding use on my eyes because I was like, if I'm going to use a palette for a wedding, it's going to be Natasha Denona. So I asked her to use this palette on my eyes, but then I also used it like a week later to give it kind of like its own moment because I really was thinking about using it again anyway. I really love this palette for this time of year and during like the fall and winter time because I really love like the deep berry tones in here and the deeper, warmer, toasty neutrals. And then these gorgeous like pinky shimmers and like this, they're just gorgeous. I love this palette. It's just so good. It ranks really, really high on my rankings for my eyeshadow palettes last year. I think it was like number 4. And I still continue to reach for this palette, and I've used it quite a bit this year, and it's definitely a palette that I reach for a lot. Like, out of most of the palettes last year, like, I want to tell you guys the palettes that I was still using throughout this year. So, again, if I don't get to this palette in the winter time, it's not a huge deal, but I wanted to mention this as one of my favorite winter palettes because I get those winter vibes from this palette, especially from Natasha, because I love the berry tones in here. But again, there's really only one berry tone and the rest is neutral. Like I said, if you cover up these 2 shades, it's basically a neutral palette. Or if you cover up these 2 shades, or these 3, or these 4, you get basically a neutral palette. So take that for what you will. It's still a gorgeous palette. It's still a gorgeous formula if you decide to use it. This is a very unique color story to me, too. I don't have anything else like this in my collection. And Natasha Denona's formula is fabulous. The hype is real. I love her formula. So, and I would definitely recommend the midi palettes over the bigger palettes because you definitely get... I don't think you need to purchase an $100 palette. These are $65. It's really not breaking the bank. It's expensive, but don't spend that on one of these palettes. And the only reason why I'm mentioning this palette is that this palette is so special to me, and I really only use this during like the winter holiday season, and that is the Natasha Denona Gold palette. Now, this is still my favorite Natasha Denona palette. This is still one of my favorite palettes in my entire collection, but I just wanted to mention this one because it is one of her best palettes ever. I didn't personally spend the money on this. I got this with an exchange from Sephora to get this palette. I was not personally going to spend the money on it, but if there was a palette that I would spend the money on, it would have been this one. But even $130, like, I really cannot justify that price. I would have only gotten this on like super sale. I think it was like $79 at one point, or under $100, and that's when I would say to snatch it up. But when it came out during the time, it was just so ridiculously overpriced. But I really do want to use this palette again at some point. I think I did use this palette once or twice this year. So again, if I don't get to it, it's not a huge deal. But this has always been one of my favorite fall winter palettes. I've used this palette a ton, as you can see. I kind of want to dip into this blue shade again. I don't think I've used that in a long time. Let's swatch this guy. They're really, really pretty palettes. This one's kind of like a duo multi-chrome. Not enough people talk about this shade. It's a really beautiful like duochrome shade. So this one is Lime Chrome, and this one is Aurora. Like, everybody talks about the Trichrome palette, but there's actually some really good ones in here too. So that one is Lime Chrome, and this one is Aurora. Even though they're not the most pigmented shimmers, they're so beautiful, like, on my hand. That's why I love her formula. And then I also love these super sparkly shades. And of course, the middle gold shade is my favorite. I mean, hello. It is the gold palette, but this is one of my best golds, if not my favorite gold metallic in my entire collection. It's like just the perfect yellow gold. I don't know why my computer just went off. Sorry, hold on one second. Just the screensaver went on. So yeah, that is pretty much it, you guys. I really love this palette, but at the same time, I would recommend getting this palette on a sale, or at least with the 20% off from Sephora. And the mattes in here are so good too. Let's swatch this blue one. The quality might be going a little bit though, just because her palettes don't have the longest shelf life, but you can pry this out of my cold dead hands. I'm never getting rid of this palette because it is way too pricey to declutter. And I use it a ton. I still use it when I can. Like, I'm still going to use it. Those are some of the matte shades. Again, they're not going to swatch the greatest. This one is Python, and this one is Log. Okay, I am done talking, you guys. I've been talking for way too long. So those are all my favorite winter eyeshadow palettes that I'm going to try and prioritize using. Again, I've already used, let's count it up. 1, 2, 3, 4... 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 palettes out of the ones that I mentioned. Some of them are more recent. The more recent palettes are the Chocolate Palette, the Game Beauty, the Blend Money, the Harry Potter, and the Christmas Day from Odin's Eye. So only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 palettes to use. Because I already used almost half. Well, actually, yeah. 9 would be half. Oh, yeah, and I used the Rudolph palette. So I have used 9 of them. That's really good. Look at me. So I only need to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's awesome. So I've used half of the ones that I need to use. No, 10. 10. So that was 19 palettes. So thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Look at my hand. Follow me on my Instagram at CBW819 and check out my Poshmark at the same handle. Let me know what your favorite winter palette is to use. Which is the palette that you keep on going back to constantly during the winter season. It does not have to be a holiday palette. It does not have to be a Christmas palette. Not everybody celebrates Christmas. So if it's just like a neutral palette that you can't stop using, let me know. I'm also going to be using the Sigma New Mod palette a lot as well. So I want to add that as well. But I did mention that in my fall favorite palettes. But I'm also going to be using it in the winter time. I just didn't want to mention it twice. but I am going to be using that palette a lot. And let me know if you guys have tried any of these palettes or if any of these are your favorite. So yeah, let me know. Okay, I love you guys. Bye.